All right. Hey, what's up, everybody? So I try to close out each of the novels with trying to make a connection between the what's going on in the novel and then kind of how it might relate back to you and your life. And so, kind of the point of this discussion is to thread all the individual parts of the hyperdoc kind of into one cohesive thought. So, what does the Handmaid's Tale have to do with my life? Well, here's how I see it. And I'm just one guy. These are my opinions. Obviously, disagree with me. But what does this have to do with you? Well, let's start from the very beginning and let's talk about why we discussed Noam Chomsky and manufacturing consent. The point that I really wanted you guys to understand in thinking about Noam Chomsky is that we live in a free society. However, that doesn't make it impenetrable. It doesn't make it impossible to weaken all of the components that are necessary in order to have a successful democracy. And Chomsky points to kind of the news and the media as one way that the democracy can be weakened, because if someone owns NBC and they decide what gets put on all of the news on NBC, and then that all gets pushed out to you and me and your parents and the governor and everybody in the United States of America, NBC is really running the show in that type of a way. And so one of the things you've noticed is that's gotten decentralized in 2020. In your guys' generation, you guys don't go to NBC for the news, right? It's probably, you guys probably have your own podcasts that you listen to. You have your own YouTube personalities that you get your news from, or, I don't really know where you get your news from. It's probably not from the Modesto Bee. So maybe it's the case that in our day and age, there's a pushback against NBC or ABC kind of running the show as far as media is concerned. But Chomsky wants you to realize that the power that NBC has is invisible. We don't think about the fact that NBC decides what stories are on the Today Show, what experts are interviewed, who gets what amount of time, what sound bites get propagated. It's like we don't really think about that. We just accept it. We just turn it on and it's the news. And Chomsky reminds us that the people that run the news are all good people, but they're doing a job. And their job is to create advertising for their clients. So when Crest, the toothpaste company, comes to NBC and says that they want to put a commercial on the news, now the news's job is to get as many people to watch as possible so that they're doing a good job for their client, which is Crest. So his point, if that's just too much, the news is not as simple as just a public service, okay? It's not the water company, it's not the electric company. It's a profit-driven model, and things get squirrely when something's a profit-driven model. All right, so that's starting with Noam Chomsky. Then we jumped over to our discussion of the Stanford prison experiment. And the reason that we did that was really to see how we create cultures of cruelty. And his main thesis is that you need three things. You need an imbalance of power, you need a dehumanized other, and you need a person in the position of power to feel like they're going to remain anonymous. Now, we had a lot of discussion about this. Many of you weren't buying it, and I agree with you. I think you might need more. And so in Stephen's experiment with the lights and the puzzle and the buzzer, we also talked about how, well, it wouldn't hurt to have demand characteristics, which is when you give someone a role and then they kind of fill that role with whatever they believe that it is that you want them to do, right? So a good example of this is if you make someone a soldier and they enlist in the U.S. Army and they say, Jared, be a soldier. I have in my mind what it means to be a soldier, right? I'm going to have to be violent. I'm going to have to be callous. I'm going to defend my country at all costs, which are all necessary things, don't get me wrong. But there's a role of soldier, and we all know what that means. And when you tell someone to be that thing, they're going to try to rise to the occasion that you've presented to them. What really helps people to be cruel is to convince them that what they're doing serves a greater good, right? So I talked to you guys really briefly about like if you would cheat for a club or for a sports program, if you knew that you just cheat a little bit and you'd win this a huge amount of money in the interest of the club. And most of you said you wouldn't do it, but a few of you said you would, and it was an interesting discussion. Also, we took the big five just to think about um, are there some people that are predisposed to aggression? And I think that the answer would be yes. So, one of the things that I think is interesting really is where do we see this in our culture where it's normalized cruelty? We see it on social media. And I'm not super familiar with TikTok, but especially with Twitter, it's totally normal and acceptable to dunk on people or to try to call people out or to try to score points. And it has those three things that Zimbardo mentioned, right? There's an imbalance of power. There's a dehumanized other because they're just a thing on the other end of the screen. And then you can either have a fake account, or is your account on Twitter or Instagram really who you are? It's like, no, it's like there's a buffer between you and who you are online, and that creates a feeling of anonymity or at least separateness from who you are and who you are online, right? And so where do we see Zimbardo's theories really coming out in 2021? My case to you in this presentation is going to be that it's really through social media, which I think is really interesting. Also, we talked about basically wanting to create an atmosphere, not so much in the hyperdoc, but one thing you want to realize is creating an atmosphere of surveillance in The Handmaid's Tale. So one of the reasons why the handmaids will not, a question that always comes up is, why don't they just like revolt? Why don't they just get together and make a plan? And there's more of them than there are ants. And it's like they could just topple this whole thing. Well, it sounds good in theory, but they can't communicate with one another. And that's why they don't want handmaids to be able to read. That's why they don't want them to be able to talk. That's why they give them scripted conversations to have, where when you see another handmaid, you say, "Blessed be the fruit," and, under his eye. They have these like 10 phrases that they're supposed to exchange. And that's to control language. Well, when you control language between two people or multiple people, that really takes away their ability to plan and fight back and raise any type of revolution. That's all going to evaporate when they can't communicate in any type of meaningful way, right? And I think it's interesting to point out, we brought up Michel Foucault for talking about a heterotopia. We didn't get to this idea of a panopticon, but I'll tell you a little thing about a panopticon real quick because I think it's interesting. This is a picture of a prison, and it's constructed in a very specific way. All of the prisoners are in a circle around the center, and the center is the guard shack. And the way that it works is it's not the guards watching the prisoners that keeps them in line. It's the fear and the belief that the guards are watching the prisoners that keeps them in line. So how do you get 3 or 4 guards to keep 300 prisoners in check? You set it up to where they don't know whether the guard is watching or not. So if these windows are tinted, and the guards can't see, the guards can see out, but the prisoners can't see in. It's kind of this feeling that someone's always watching you. And if someone's always watching you, you're going to tend to try to do the right thing all the time, because you don't know when you're going to get caught when you're not doing the right thing. And so it's just this culture of surveillance. Well, guys, I probably don't need to tell you the culture of surveillance that we're creating with devices, right? And so we have things like cookies, which are tracking all of the websites that you visit. We have these apps that are almost like voyeuristic. I know you guys don't know much, like haven't heard much about Clubhouse, but I think it's going to get big, which is basically you sign up to listen to other people's phone calls. So there'll be 2 people chatting, or 3 or 5 or 10 or 20. And then a celebrity might pop in, like Kanye might be on Clubhouse, and you might get to overhear him talking. And it's like these apps on our phones are just making it totally normal that all of our privacy is obliterated, and that, someone's always watching you, right? And even now it's getting normalized with like cameras for school. And like I have now like 5 cameras in my classroom, and it's like bit by bit, bit by bit, day by day, I get more and more used to it. And that's exactly going back to what Aunt Lydia said, where she says, this doesn't feel ordinary to you now, but it will. And she's like, ordinary is whatever you get used to. There's no central ordinary. It's just what you've been conditioned to kind of exist in, right? And that's kind of a scary thought, because it's like we can just move down paths bit by bit by bit by bit, and it's always ordinary to us, when it's like a year goes by and you turn around and you're like, oh my gosh, this isn't ordinary at all. Like I live in La La Land, but I didn't realize I was getting there because it was so gradual. All right, which leads us to our discussion of things being incremental. And so one of the focus questions on the hyperdoc is to talk about um, basically how Gilead kind of got away with taking away people's rights. And I won't go into it because we've kind of already talked about it on the hyperdoc, but these are the steps that they took. And when you think about it with social media, I mean, you start kids off really young on devices, and Google Classroom has definitely had a lot to do with that, where kids are 5 and 6 and 7, and especially with distance learning, they're expected to be on Chromebooks working with Google's interface. And then they might get a little older and they might want Snapchat for kids, and then they get a little older and they might want Snapchat for teenagers and adults. And then how do you keep them on social media as adults? Then you get them into Twitter, you get them into Reddit, and it's kind of like the frog in the boiling pot, where it's like, we're going to give you a little bit of social media, we're going to give you a little bit of um, we're going to give you a little bit of technology, and then we're going to ramp it up as you get older and more experienced and more, kind of enveloped into the social media landscape. And it's kind of just bit by bit by bit. And so, one of the things that got me off my phone, and then I got back on it, but one of the things was someone posed a question. If you guys can even imagine this, if you didn't have a phone at all, period, and someone came to you, crazy person, and they had this phone and they said, look, like, I'm going to give you this piece of technology, and it has all of the knowledge of humanity built into it, and it has every like way that you could possibly communicate with another person built into it, and it has music, and it has directions when you drive, and you can order food on it, and you can order a ride to come pick you up. It can do almost just about anything, but it comes at a price. You're going to be super addicted to it. It's going to make you depressed. It's going to make you anxious. It's going to make you spend money that you wouldn't otherwise. It's going to make you ignore the people that mean most to you and that you love. It's going to make you feel like you need to be available all the time to your friends and your work. It's going to make you feel like you need to feel guilty when you put it away, because then you're not being a good friend, you're not being a good employee. And there's a 90% chance that it's going to be within arm's length of you for the rest of your life, every minute of every day, which is true. 90% of Americans are within arm's reach of their phone 24 hours a day, meaning you sleep with it next to your bed, you go to the bathroom with it in your pocket, you always have it out when you're working, or it's in your bag. Even if you go to like soccer practice, it's in your bag, or you might even have it in your pocket because you don't want to miss your friend's snap, because you don't want to break your streak. It's like you're going to give up a lot for all of humanity's knowledge, music, being able to order food. It's a huge benefit and it's a huge cost. Now, do you want the phone? Because now it wasn't a bit by bit transition where you started to use your phone more and more and more throughout your life. It's like all or nothing. And the answer for me was no. I'd be like, I'd rather not have a phone, and I'd rather give it up. And so I did. I took a break, and then, I'm a weak human being, and now I'm right back at it. So it's just something to think about. Okay. Another thing that we talked about was getting people to kind of buy into the tyranny. So we see Gilead, and we see all these people that, probably really don't want a lot to do with this society, but then they're given incentives to kind of buy in, to operate within the community that they're kind of placed in. And so we talked about how for the men in the society, they can kind of work up, and there's this promise of, if you do a good job, you could have your own handmaid one day, you could even be a commander one day. And so these men are willing to do these really icky jobs at the very bottom of the hierarchy with the promise that they'll move up, right? How do they get handmaids to play along? Well, they promise them that they'll, like, if they can birth a baby, they'll be like immune to ever being sent to the colonies or being declared an unwoman. So there's this really sick and sadistic, but there's this built-in incentive for these women to perform their duty that they've been given. And one thing to think about is about 3/4 of the way through the book, Offred really gets interested in her relationship with Nick. And it's interesting to track how she really, in my opinion, she starts to become kind of uninterested in trying to get out of her situation. She's like, I have someone that makes me feel comfortable. I have something to do. I have something to make me feel like I'm kind of a person again. She's like, I could probably just do this because it's too scary to try to tear the world apart and try to find my daughter. That's just too much to try to do. And I don't want to go back to the way things were before I met Nick. So I'm just kind of in this purgatory. I'm just kind of in this middle place with Nick. And she's like, maybe I'll just stay here. And she definitely has those thoughts. And then obviously Serena Joy has this bargaining token over Offred and is trying to get her. Serena Joy is trying to get Offred to do what Serena Joy wants, and she uses this. I won't give it away because if you haven't read, she uses this to kind of get Offred to buy into the system that they're all stuck in, right? And so, I kind of think about all the opportunity. If TikTok, let's say that TikTok has tyrannical aspects to it, right? You have the anonymity, you have the imbalance of power, you have the dehumanized other. How do you get people to buy into that? That let's call it social a social environment with tyrannical characteristics. So it's a social world with tyrannical elements. Let's just say that for the sake of argument. How do you get people to buy into that? How do you get people to want to participate in something that has tyrannical characteristics? And you see, there's no shortage of this. You can make money off of it, right? You can get involved and you can make money on TikTok, or you can take a masterclass on becoming a TikTok influencer. And it's structured so that it can become something that you can get good at and you can get successful at. And the more people that become wrapped into the idea of, man, I could become an influencer, the less people are going to want to tear down the tyranny of social media, right? The more people that are bought in and like, oh, I'm going to make it as a TikToker, I'm going to make it as a YouTuber, I'm going to make it I'm going to get 1 million followers on Twitter. The more people that are bought into that social media system, the less people are interested in tearing it down, right? So it's almost like this big teeter totter. And like once you can get enough people to kind of just push it over the edge to where like the tyranny is taking over and more people want to be in the tyranny than not, that's when things just go haywire, right? But the problem with something like social media is, we'll talk about this more when we get to Frankenstein. It's wired to be addictive, right? It's why it's designed to keep you on the device for as long as possible through things like algorithms, through things like when you refresh Instagram, it mimics a slot machine. It's like they have engineers that went to Harvard designing things to keep you on your phone. And those people are smarter than you and me put together. And we're just really up against unfair odds to try to unhook out of this. Okay. So look, I don't want you to think that I am a tinfoil hat person, and I don't want you to think that I'm crazy. I just want you to think about, you read this book and you say, look, Jeffrey's just this world has nothing to do with me. It's like I read it, maybe you thought it was interesting, maybe you thought that it was written beautifully and written well, which I think that it was, but this is a tyranny. And then I tried to show you something in our world that has a tyrannical structure. I tried to show you how people bought into this tyranny, and I tried to show you how people buy into the tyrannous structure in our culture. I tried to show you that the tyrannous structure here is bit by bit, it's incremental. And I tried to show you that the tyrannous thing that exists in our world is bit by bit and incremental. I tried to show you that there's a culture of surveillance in this book. And I tried to show you that our world around social media and devices is very much a culture of surveillance. And so I don't want you to quit your social media. I don't want you to do anything differently. I just want to prove to you that this book is more applicable to your life and my life, and that the things that are proven in this book are more applicable to your world and my world in 2021 than we probably first realized. And that's really my only goal in making this video. It's just to get you to maybe think about, like, this world is so different, but in what ways is it the same? And I think that's why literature is so interesting. because you're reading about completely different people than you, and then you're trying to think about how their experiences are in some ways similar. And we're all human beings, and we all share what this thing called the human experience, right? And the human experience is very similar across the board for time period, for geographic location, for socioeconomic stat, like all these things. It's like people really are people in so many ways, and that's kind of what literature is all about. So hey, if you watch this whole thing, you are awesome, and I hope you got something out of it. Thanks.